the Institute of Classical Studies in Budapest. He has been extensively working in Thebes since 1995, and I dare to say that he is one of the most important specialists and most knowledgeable people about Al-Khawqa. For us, it's not only a pleasure of hosting you for your lecture tonight, but also I can say it's very important to have you here because we are preparing an exhibition next year on the so-called Tomb of Soter, and we're trying to put together pieces of collections which are dispersed everywhere in Europe, and your work and your archaeological work and the archaeological reconstruction will be of vital importance. So thank you again for being here, and I leave the floor to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are. First of all, let me thank Christian for the invitation and also for this kind introduction. I feel truly honored to be here and have the chance to talk to you. In this presentation, I will talk about two Theban tombs, TT 32 and 400. Situated in the center of the Theban necropolis on the El Hoja hillock. My goal is not to give you an in-depth analysis of the decorative programs or the archaeology of these tombs, but to focus on the original Ramesside owners and the Ramesside history of the site. This site formed a specific district of the Theban necropolis, which as a whole is actually no other than a vast and intricate tapestry or system of similar smaller topographical units or quarters in which the tombs belonging to the same topographical unit share some common traits in one way or another. In other words, we can say that each district of the cemetery had its own characteristics, shaped by the social standing, the intellectual demand, the taste of the tomb owners, as well as by the resources these owners could afford to spend on the monuments. By singling out two Ramesside tombs and examining them in a broader topographical perspective, I would like to raise one question in this presentation, namely, what was the character of this specific district of the necropolis in the Ramesside period? To begin with, let me show you around the site. As said, the El Hoja hillock is situated in the center of the Theban necropolis, bordered by El Asasif on the northeast, Sheikh Abda Gurna on the west, and the zone of the Ramesseum on the southwest. As you can see here, Dera Bahari with the famous terrace temple of Hatshepsut is also in the vicinity. It is very important to note here that the oldest rock-cut tombs of the entire Theban necropolis are situated on the southern slope of the El Hoja hillock, making this zone a particularly prestigious area of the cemetery with a very long history, which ranges between the late Old Kingdom and the Roman period. It is on the southern slope of this hill where various Hungarian missions have been active since the 1980s. And the initiation of the fieldwork was the merit of the late László Professor Kákosi, who in 1983 asked for and gained a concession to excavate Theban-tomb 32, a monumental temple tomb constructed for one Jehutimes in the reign of Ramesses II. Since then, the concession area has been extended significantly, and it now comprises a number of tombs in the first, the second, and the third necropolis streets, or rows of tombs, of the El-Hoha hillock. The largest Ramesside mortuary monument of this area is TT32 at the base of the hill. I have to say that for a very long time this was the flagship project of the Hungarian mission, and the fieldwork is still ongoing here with the architectural restoration of the superstructure of the tomb, as well as with the exploration of the adjacent areas. However, in 2007, the focus of the excavation activity has shifted onto Theban tomb 400, another Ramesside mortuary monument in the immediate vicinity of TT32, to which I shall come back later. On the other side of Theban tomb 32, another small tomb, TT64, also belongs in our concession. This tomb was constructed for one Amenhotep, overseer of the first Philae in the reign of Thutmose III. The original burial shaft of this tomb was provided with 5 burial apartments on 3 stories, which were in use from the reign of Thutmose III down to the early Ramesside period. Besides this shaft, there is another shaft in the outer forecourt of this tomb that we will clean, or we hope to clean, in the next archaeological campaign this March. The tombs in the second necropolis street of the El-Hoha remain as yet largely unexcavated. In 2010, we commenced the clearing and documentation of TT179, a small 18th dynasty tomb constructed for Nebamun, counter of grain in the reign of Thutmose III. This tomb has long been known to Egyptology, and the murals painted on in its skull chapel already attracted the attention of earlier scholars. In the first half of the 20th century, a number of Egyptologists and epigraphists visited the tomb, including Walter Bryan Emery, then working for the Mond expedition, Nina Davis, one of the pioneers of Egyptian epigraphy, Charles K. Wilkinson from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, as well as Siegfried Schott and Keith C. Seeley from the expedition of the Oriental Institute of Chicago. Nina Davis and Wilkinson also copied some scenes, for example, this masterfully painted pet Saluki dog, shown seated under her owner's chair, which apparently triggered the imagination of both Davis and Wilkinson. Despite these early efforts, the tomb remained unexcavated and unpublished. Our field work, our research program carried out here since 2010 has mainly focused on the epigraphic documentation of the murals. In the framework of this project, color-coded facsimile drawings were made of the scenes in the antechamber and the axial hall of the tomb. By means of a digital epigraphic method that was developed specifically for the documentation of this tomb by our epigraphist Christian Vértes. To illustrate the results, let me show you here the facsimile copy of the western wall in the axial hall, which depicts a large-sized offering scene, as well as several other scenes arranged in registers, such as the riverine journey of the dead to the necropolis, then the scenes of the so-called sacred district, and finally, in the upper registers, the funerary procession. As you can see here, we also studied the loose mural fragments, which convincingly prove that the now missing left-handed upper corner of this wall face once depicted the Abydos pilgrimage. That is the riverine journey of the deceased to and from the sacred city of Osiris. As far as the history of the tomb is concerned, we can be absolutely sure that TT 179 was reused already during the later periods of the New Kingdom, when two intrusive structures were recessed in the facade, and yet another very small T-shaped Ramesside tomb was cut in the floor court of TT 179. So far, only the original 18th dynasty forecourt was cleared completely, which was the find spot of two 18th dynasty coffin lids, and this superb Ramesside mummy mask, all three objects otherwise originating in nearby Theban tomb 400. And finally, we also worked in the third necropolis street, where two tombs, TT 59 and 61, were excavated and studied between 1995 and 2008. The history of these tombs is really very similar in that both were originally constructed in the 18th dynasty. Then after a period of abandonment and decay, they became reused in the late Ramesside period. Now I would like to show you a chart with the comparative chronology of three Ramesside tombs, which is actually a summary of our work done in these tombs over 2 decades. We may draw a number of conclusions from this chart. First, it is apparent that none of these tombs was built on a virgin soil in the Ramesside period. There were two great waves of tomb building on the El Hoha during the New Kingdom, one dated to the reign of Thutmose III, the other to the reign of Ramses II. And as you can see here, both were motivated by the relative proximity of the given king's mortuary temple, since the mortuary temple of Thutmose III is located at the forefront, at the base of the El Hoha, while that of Ramesses II somewhat farther on the southwest. Second, it is also apparent that shortly after the original Ramesside burials had taken place, all three tombs were reused already during the New Kingdom. Tomb reuse is therefore not a practice solely typical of the first millennium BC, but one which of course had an acceptance already during the New Kingdom. And third, it is probably also clearly discernible that all three tombs have more than one phase of reuse. I have to say that this pattern is absolutely typical of the Hoha tombs, and we may add Theban tombs in general, the significance of which should not be underestimated, since we too often think of Theban tombs as monuments belonging to one specific period of the Egyptian history, but in reality their majority remained in use for centuries after the date of construction. Theban tombs, and this is especially true of the Hoha tombs, are thus better regarded, better understood as holy places, which in a way similar to a temple form parts of the sacred landscape of Western Thebes for very long periods of time. Now these three tombs, Titi 32, 61 and 400, have truly exceedingly long use lives with multiple changes of ownership. And we can add that, of course, each of these changes meant new proprietors coming from different walks of life, which again means that the character and the prestige of the cemetery were subject to permanent change. Now I will only talk about the Ramesside history of the cemetery, first to highlight the characteristics of the 19th dynasty. Then I will turn to what we know of the 20th dynasty in this part of the necropolis. Let's turn first to Theban tomb 32, which as said is the largest Ramesside mortuary monument on the southern slope of the El Hoha, and which was constructed for one Jehutimes, royal scribe and chief steward of Amun in the reign of Ramses II. As you can see here, the tomb is provided with three grandiose, articulate, open forecourts, a car chapel of the traditional T-shaped plan, a spiral-shaped sloping passage, burial apartments, and a mud brick pyramid built on the steep hillside. As already mentioned, Theban tomb 32 was not built on a virgin soil, since as you can see here, its first two forecourts partly overlie a cemetery of 18th dynasty shaft tombs. Besides this, there is yet another 18th dynasty tomb structure in the innermost forecourt of Titi 32. This is Tumbo, which also elucidates that the hewing of Titi 32 had already started in the 18th dynasty for an owner whose name is unknown. Jehutimes was thus only a second owner of this plot of land, who completely reorganized the area, backfilled the 18th dynasty shaft tombs, and concealed their openings. Titi 32 as a whole is one of the most sophisticated examples of the Ramesside temple tomb. That is the combination of a burial apartment and a veritable sanctuary for otherworldly gods, in which the layout of a tomb was assimilated to that of a temple. In accordance with the ideal layout of a temple tomb, access to the chapel was possible through open forecourts. In this period, it is absolutely typical that a tomb has one or two forecourts. However, Titi 32 is quite unique in that it can be shown to have had three subsequent forecourts. The first two ones were undecorated, only whitewashed. However, the innermost forecourt was actually peristyle with 16 pillars carrying the truss of the roofed sections along all four sides. The gateways were flanked by pylon towers, of which the innermost pair, shown here after restoration, was still standing at the time of the Napoleonic expedition. Hence we know that this innermost pair of pylon towers was decorated with the stamp bricks of Jehotimes, of which well over 100 examples have been uncovered during the excavations. The innermost forecourt, or peristyle, was also decorated with scenes in sunk relief, and logically enough, the most important depictions are found on the rear wall of the peristyle. That is actually, of course, also the facade for the chapel, the rock-cut parts. Now, as you can see here, this facade shows some asymmetry in that the door leading to the rock-cut parts is not positioned on the axis. The explanation of this asymmetry is the fact that, as said, the carving of TT32 had already started for an unknown owner in the 18th dynasty, and thus Jehotimes, who was but a second owner, could not change the position of the entrance to place it in a central position on the axis of his much larger forecourt. To overcome this difficulty, the designer, the architect of Tim 32, found a truly refined solution by placing the funerary stela of the tomb in a central position on the axis, with the true door leading to the cult chapel on the east, and the false door placed symmetrically on the west. The peristyle abounded in statuary, since 12 out of the 16 pillars were also decorated with half statues, which of course depicted the owner, Jehotimes, wearing a Ramesside festal dress. Together with these statues, which were enshrined half statues on the facade, the pillar statues gave an utterly Osirian character to this peristyle. To balance this and to further embellish the peristyle, the designer architect of TT32 placed a number of freestanding Stylophorus statues in the intercolumniums at the two sides. Such a configuration required altogether 10 statues, arranged, of course, in two groups of 5, of which 5 statues have been uncovered during the excavations. All the statues were individualized, but as you can probably see here, each depicted the owner, Jehotimes, kneeling in the gesture of adoration with his hands raised and rested behind or atop stela, which featured a hymn addressed to the sun god at his rising or setting. Taking these informations together, we can say that the peristyle boasted 3 statue groups: enshrined half statues on the facade, half statues on the pillars, and freestanding Stylophorus statues in the intercolumniums, the co-presence of which, or the juxtaposition of which, gave a very clear visual expression of the correspondences which existed between the solar and the Osirian doctrines, itself a key point in Egyptian mortuary theology. Entering now the rock-cut parts, we can easily recognize that the cult chapel follows the traditional T-shaped plan with a transverse hall, an axial hall, and a statue room. The decoration is predominated by scenes and texts concerned with the netherworld, as well as with the transfiguration and the cult of the deceased. A good illustration may be this wall, the southern wall in the transverse hall, where one encounters 3 registers, each showing the deceased in a different stage of his transfiguration. Alluding to the otherworldly journey the dead had to make or had to undergo, the uppermost register features extracts from the gate chapters of the Book of the Dead. Then the middle register is a picture strip style composition taken from the ritual of opening of the mouth, which evokes the reanimation and the transfiguration of the deceased. While in the lower register we can see the dead themselves in a fully transfigured state as they receive the oblations on the great festival days of the sacred year. Scenes of daily life are so typical of earlier 18th dynasty tomb decoration are no longer found here. And as you can see here, sometimes even the carpet pattern of earlier 18th dynasty tomb ceilings is replaced by new compositions, in this case Book of the Dead chapters 15 and 17, which depict the celestial world. On the rear wall of this transverse hall, one can see a quite complicated doorway flanked by 2 enshrined half statues, as if this was another facade for another second inner shrine, which is, of course, the axial hall of the tomb. The axial hall features once again scenes and images which in one way or another all allude to the journey to the netherworld and to the process of acquiring an Osirian state of the spirit for the deceased. As a conclusion of this sequence, we can see a scene of arrival at the, or close to the doorway leading to the statue room. This scene is, of course, the reception of the deceased by Amentet, the Western goddess. Besides its emphatic religious significance, this scene may also attract us because it not only depicts the actual mud brick pyramid of the tomb, but also this very interesting entrance porch or entrance portico leaning against the innermost pair of pylon towers. This scene is consequently a very accurate rendering of what the ancient visitor could see when he or she entered the second forecourt of the tomb. And of course, as this scene also puts it, this is also the place where the Western goddess was believed to give a warm welcome to Jehutimes. Now, returning to the cult chapel and entering the statue room, the ancient visitor could see 3 statue groups, each depicting a family triad with their arrangements reflecting each other. In a typical Ramesside fashion, a pride of place was given to the divine triad, Osiris, Isis, and Horus, whose rock-cut effigies appear in a niche on the axis of the cult chapel. At the 2 sides of this divine statue group, there were 2 other freestanding statue groups, one depicting Jehutimes with his parents, Henut-Wejebu and Amenmes, the other Jehutimes with his own family, his wife Isis and their son Amenmes. Now these two freestanding statue groups were relegated to a secondary position and turned at right angles to the central statue group so that they faced each other. This arrangement also implies that closest to the gods were the females, Isis and Henut-Wejebu, and closest to the ritualist approaching the cult place were the great man of the family, Jehutimes, and his father, Amenmes. These statues formed, of course, the apex of the entire decorative program, and the room which housed them was the last unit of the cult chapel. What follows behind is the actual burial complex, which was originally closed by a wooden door, needless to say, now, of course, lost. Unusually, the first unit of this complex is a decorated chamber, which depicts the funerary entourage and Book of the Dead, chapter 153. Then a long 62-meter long spiral-shaped winding sloping passage follows, which is terminated in a burial shaft 9 meters in depth. And as you can see here, the burial chamber of Jehutimes and Isis opens at the bottom of the shaft. Due to ancient and modern tomb looting, very little of the original burial equipment remained preserved. The collection of objects associated with Jehutimes includes some fragmentary Shapti figures, a fragmentary Shapti box, kind of canopic jars, a very interesting open work canopic chest not illustrated here, then fragments from his wooden open work mummy board, magical bricks, and a series of early Ramesside pottery, mostly amphorae. However, the most important elements of the original burial assemblage were two large stone sarcophagi, decorated with texts and images taken from Book of the Dead chapters 151 and 161. As it is discernible here, the chests of the sarcophagi have been found in situ in the painted burial chamber. However, the lids, the complete lid of Jehutimes and the upper half of the lid of Isis, were removed out of context and transported to Europe already in the early 19th century, finally ending up here in the Museo Egizio. We have evidence that following the members of the Napoleonic expedition, a number of European antiquities collectors, antiquarians, travelers visited the tomb in the early 19th century. And some of these visitors, or antiquarians, including Jean-Jacques Riffaut, Antonio Lebolo, and Giuseppe Rosignani, also known as Joseph or Joseph, also wrote their graffiti in the tomb. Based on this graffiti, we may presume that it was one of these individuals, probably Riffaut or Lebolo, who removed the sarcophagus lids out of their original context and assisted in the transport to Europe. It is, however, not only these two sarcophagus lids which found their way here to the Museo Egizio. I would like to draw your attention to yet another sarcophagus lids. You are indeed very rich in sarcophagus lids, which was made for one Shepmin, who was a member of the Ptolemaic family, the famous Nesmin family, which occupied the tomb in the 3rd century BC. And as you can see here, this chapman was buried in a floor niche in an intrusive burial chamber, which is situated opposite that of Jehotimes. Now, after this brief tour of the tomb, I would like to turn to what we know of the life and career of Jehotimes. The cause of someone's career can be securely reconstructed if we have a wide array of relevant sources, ideally including a text with narrative elements, for example, a biography. Unfortunately, no such texts have come down to us, so we are left with studying the titles of Jehotimes, especially the frequency and hierarchies, from which we can also learn a lot. Jehotimes bears 11 different titles in his tomb inscriptions, some of which appear in 6 or 8 variants. By examining the frequency, hierarchy, and variants of these titles, and also comparing them with those of his father and son, we may formulate some conclusions concerning his career. It can be stated with confidence that Jehotimes was born into a noble family in Esna, a town some 60 kilometers south of Thebes, and followed in his father's track in being governor of Esna. His wife, Isis, also came from Esna, since she is sometimes called the Chantress of Neptune, a local goddess in Esna, while in one of her speeches inscribed in the tomb, she addresses a praise to Menehit, another goddess native to Esna. It is important to note that from the beginning of his career, Jehotimes was first and foremost an economic officer, first officiating as an overseer of barley and emmer, then inheriting the title overseer of the arable fields from his father. Still later, he was promoted to the post of the overseer of the arable fields of the southern province. It remains unknown whether it was about this time or later that he also started to fulfill the duties of the overseer of the granaries of Amun, a high post in the Theban temple economy. It is beyond doubt, however, that at a certain stage of his career, Jehotimes also served in the royal court. It was his expertise in managing large-scale agricultural affairs that brought him to the capital in the north and earned him the high posts, overseer of the arable fields of the Lord of the Two Lands, and overseer of the granaries of Upper and Lower Egypt. Jehotimes was also a royal scribe and obtained 2 further titles, royal envoy to all foreign lands and chief stable master of His Majesty, connected with the royal court. As far as this stage of Jehotimes' career is concerned, we may assume that his tenure in the royal court was not a long one. Such a conclusion may be deduced from the fact that the titles associated with the royal court appear rather rarely in comparison with the mention of other economic head offices that he later fulfilled within the domain of Amun. This period of his career is indirectly also hinted at in the inscription which is written on the back of the freestanding statue group depicting Jehotimes with his wife and son. This text, arranged in 10 columns, starts off with a commonplace offering formula, then a eulogy of Jehotimes follows. This is the first place where the admiration of Jehotimes for the king is expressed, and where Jehotimes is said to be the one, I quote, who loves his Lord, who exalts his kingship to the elevation of the sky on the throne of Horus, Lord of this land." Unquote. However, the real novelty of the text comes to the fore only with the speech of Jehotimes that I quote in full length. He says, "Ever since I existed, my Lord appreciated me, for I am one truly straightforward. I did not mingle with the blusterous, I did not make friends with the mistaken. I did not yet follow instructions from a foe, in whose house no one joined another." As far as his statements are concerned, this is, of course, the voice of the loyalist. The demonstration of an ethical, sinless life is, to be sure, a subject very fitting in a mortuary context. At the same time, the speech of Jehotimes is highly personal, as if he was to talk about events he himself saw and witnessed. It is also interesting that the emphasis is laid not on his personal merits, not on what he did, but on the contrary, on what he did not do. The details remain veiled. We learn that Jehotimes did not conspire, did not commit treason, did not open up his house to conspiracy, but were there others who did? Although the text is intentionally mute on this point, it seems apparently so. It looks Jehotimes talks about events that could not be openly discussed. Such an interpretation is also in keeping with the fact that this text remained hidden to the eyes of the visitor, since, as said, the back of the statue faced the western side wall of the statue room. Unfortunately, there is of course no way of knowing whether the events referred to in the inscription had any direct bearing on the course of his career. What can be taken for granted is that in the last stage of his career, Jehotimes returned to the south, to Thebes, where he was promoted to the high post of the chief steward of Amun, that is the known priestly leader of Amun's temple estate. Besides this title that he himself considered his main post, Jehotimes also continued to bear the title overseer of the granaries of Amun. Taken together, we can briefly summarize the career of Jehotimes as that of an economic head officer who was active in both the royal administration and the largest temple estate of Ramesside, Egypt, sometimes perhaps overlappingly. In the next few minutes, let's turn our attention to Theban Tomb 400 and examine the early Ramesside use of the cemetery in a broader topographical context. TT 400 is a contemporaneous tomb structure built for one Hamin, a treasury scribe in the immediate vicinity of Theban Tomb 32. The tomb is much smaller than that of Jehotimes, but the structure features all mandatory elements of an ideal Ramesside tomb, including an open forecourt, a chapel, and a burial apartment accessible through a sloping passage. Although the murals in the chapel are in a bad state of repair, we can safely state that the decorative program, if on a more modest scale, has much in common with that of TT32, especially as far as the scene selection and the arrangement of the decoration are concerned. The same is true of the history of the tomb, which, as seen, is comparable to that of TT32 in many ways. I would now only like to highlight two facts concerning the original, early Ramesside phase of Hamin's tomb. First, similarly to TT32, TT400 also belongs in the so-called Hoha tomb group. That is a group of early Ramesside mortuary monuments situated on the El Hoha hillock that share some common idiosyncratic architectural, stylistic, and iconographic traits. I will come back to this issue in a minute. Second, the personality and socio-economic background of the tomb owner is also noteworthy, especially as compared to his neighbor. According to his main title, Hamin was a treasury scribe in the domain of Amun, that is, a learned person with training in managing economic affairs, who officiated in the treasury in the northern part of Karnak. He also bore the title Scribe of the Divine Offering of Amun, meaning that he was an officer belonging to the lower echelon of the elite in the economic department of the domain of Amun. The only priestly title Hamin bore calls him the Prophet of Maat. This title occurs only twice, both times in the inscriptions of his funerary stela on the facade, which features a sun hymn as the main text. The Temple of Maat was located in the same general area as the treasury, in the northern part of Karnak, and interestingly, the personnel of the two institutions are often intertwined. Although Hamin had a priestly post here, pride of place in his titulary is always given to his scribal offices. Working as a treasury scribe and the scribe of the divine offering, Hamin ranked among the leaders of these institutions, but not among the top managers, and to be sure, he was subordinated in rank to such a person as Jehutimes. Looking at the immediate vicinity of TT 32 and 400, we can see a similar pattern. As already noted, the majority of the tombs built on El Hoja at this time form a homogeneous group as far as their architecture and decorative programs are concerned. With the exception of one, all these tombs belonging to the so-called Hoja tomb group were built in the second half of Ramses II's reign. Beyond the typological and stylistic similarities, it is also quite noticeable that the tomb owners had ties with the royal administration and/or economic offices. Among the tomb owners, Kai, Jehutimes, Nebsumenu, Nefermenu, and Nebneshem were royal scribes, and with Jehutimes and Nebsumenu there is evidence for the service in the royal court. As seen, Jehutimes was also the head of the Theban temple economy as the chief steward of Amun. The owners of other tombs, also belonging to the Hoja tomb group, were linked directly to separate units of the temple economy. They include officials working in the divine offering and the treasury, such as Neferzeheru and Hamin, and the governor of livestock, Ipi. Yet another mortuary monument closely connected with the Hoja tomb group is Theban tomb 373, the owner of which, Amenmes, was just like Jehutimes, a royal scribe, whereas in the administration he bore a title connected with food collection. The two people are also connected by their place of origin, because both of them started their careers in the region south of Thebes. Jehutimes, as said, came from Esna, while Amenmes from around Tot Hermontis. Furthermore, personal contact between Jehutimes and Nebsumenu on the one hand, and Jehutimes and Nefermenu on the other can even be proven, since in TT 183 and 184, depictions show the owner of the neighboring mortuary monument, Jehutimes. Therefore, in the time of Ramses II, we find people in the necropolis on the southern slope of El Hoja who formed a soci-professional cluster, relatively high-ranking officials working in administration, and controllers of the temple economy, and, it is important to add, their senior employees. In the last section of my talk, I would like to turn to what we know of the 20th dynasty history of the site. During this period, newly built tombs significantly dropped in numbers, yet we still have evidence for well over 60 private mortuary monuments from the Theban necropolis that were decorated during the last century of the New Kingdom. Decorating a tomb did not necessarily entail building one, since in many cases the late Ramesside proprietors reused an older, already existing tomb structure that they repainted, usually investing a lot of effort in concealing the traces of former ownership. Since the southern slope of the El Hoham was completely built up under Ramses II, it seems that all later tomb owners, including those of the first millennium BC, either refurbished and reused a previously existing tomb or built something in the already formed area of such a tomb. Based on the way of how a tomb was reused, the late Ramesside history of the El Hoha cemetery can be split into two phases, one corresponding to the reign of Ramses III, the other to the second half of the 20th dynasty. The first phase is nicely illustrated by two neighboring tombs situated in the third necropolis street, TT 59 and 61, both excavated by the Hungarian mission. These tombs, as said, have much in common in that both were originally constructed in the 18th dynasty, then they became reused in the reign of Ramses III. It is also noteworthy that both Ramesside owners worked as priests at the Mut temple in Karnak, so we are dealing here once again with a collegial cluster. TT 59 was originally designed for one Menhepere Seneb, who had the T-shaped car chapel hewn from the bedrock, and commissioned the decoration, of which the murals in the transverse hall, now underlying the late Ramesside scenes, were apparently completed in his lifetime. Menhepere Seneb also built a wide and spacious forecourt, partly overlying the famous late Old Kingdom tomb of Unisan, and a burial shaft for his interment. Some 300 years later, the new owner, Bakenamun, made several architectural alterations. He had the forecourt and the facade replanned, added a short sloping passage and a burial chamber to the tomb, and most importantly, repainted the transverse hall, with scenes now also painted on in the axial hall. Even more extensive architectural alterations can be observed in neighboring TT 61. The 18th dynasty owner of this tomb remains unknown, but it can be stated with confidence that the forecourt, the chapel, and the tomb shaft of TT 61 had already been completed in the Thutmose period. The late Ramesside proprietor of this tomb was one Amenhotep, who, besides being a priest of Mut, also officiated as a temple physician in the domain of Amun. Amenhotep divided the forecourt into two spatial units by building a gateway in the middle of the forecourt and concealed the 18th dynasty shaft opening. He also added a 23-meter long sloping passage and a new burial apartment to the structure, and decorated the chapel, which, unlike that of TT59, was still blank before the time of Ramses III. Taken together with TT59 and 61, we have clear evidence for extensive architectural alterations, additions, refurbishments, as well as new decorative programs carried out in the Hoha tombs during the reign of Ramses III. From the reign of his immediate successor down to the end of the New Kingdom, nothing similar can be detected in the Hoha necropolis. This period of the cemetery may be illustrated by two group burials, one deposited within TT61, the other in TT400. For those buried in TT400, a secondary shaft tomb, structure 5, was constructed, whose burial chamber was large enough to house well over 20 interments, deposited here in several layers, one above the other. The new owners did not add new scenes to the existing murals, but it is to be noted that in Theban tomb 400, the area in front of the early Ramesside funerary stela of the tomb was turned into a collective offering place, where a large number of ceramic vessels, mostly bead jars and plates, as well as stone vessels, were piled up in the 20th dynasty. The stone vessels are particularly interesting since they were made on the spot from local limestone with a very simple chip flint technique. In two cases, it could also be proven that the raw material used for their construction was quarried in neighboring TT179, obviously indicating that some tombs in the vicinity were already desolate, being an easy prey for looters. During this period, TT61 and 400 accommodated the burials of low to mid-ranking local officials, their consorts and offspring. Despite the not too elevated social status, these persons were still laid to rest here in some style. Although the coffins could not be studied, since their majority either perished or were removed out of context to be recycled by later intruders, mummy boards made of cartonnage and ornamented with elaborate painted decoration proved symptomatic in this context. Those buried in TT400 include two chief workmen of the domain of Amun, a treasury scribe and the chief guardian of the treasury, as well as the consorts, meaning that we are dealing here again with a professional association linked to the same institution, the treasury, which the original tomb owner, Hamin, had also worked for. The most important member of this group was Van Amen Mas, chief guardian of the treasury in the domain of Amun, who is attested in the archaeological record by 20 wooden shaptis and 3 shapti jars. Remarkably, Amen Mas is also known from other sources, including a block statue from Karnak and 2 papyri, one dating to the reign of Ramses VI, the other to year 17 of Ramses IX. These sources allow us a glimpse into the career of Amen Mas, who in the papyrus dated to the reign of Ramses VI and kept here in the Museo Egizio, is still mentioned as an ordinary guardian of the treasury, acting as an envoy of the high priest Ramses Nacht. Later, by year 17 of Ramses IX at the latest, he was promoted to the post of the chief guardian of the treasury, and according to the text of the block statue, he finished his career bearing a series of further titles, including God's Father and Prophet of Amun in the domain of Ptah, scribe of the personal and commandant of the domain of Amun. Papyrus British Museum 10068 is particularly interesting since this is an investigation file concerning the great Theban tomb robberies which occurred during the reign of Ramses IX. In this document, Amenmès is listed among the citizens of the town, that is Thebes, from whom gold and silver stolen from the royal tombs had been recovered. This, of course, immediately invites the question, did Amenmès himself, as the chief security officer of the treasury, take part in the robberies, or quite the contrary? Did he help as a loyal official to repossess the stolen goods? Unfortunately, there is no answer to these questions, if for nothing else for the reason that, as a number of sources indicate, in the last decades of the Ramesside period, the emptying of the earlier royal tombs and the reuse of the valuables inside them were organized also by the inner circle of the Theban high priest. One thing is for certain, Amenmès avoided the punishment that was otherwise lashed out for major crimes, as he did have his own burial in one of the central tombs of the Theban necropolis in the crisis-ridden last decades of the New Kingdom. The late Ramesside finds from TT 400 allow a glimpse into the life of this period, and they clearly show that now not even the relatively highly respected and trusted people could think of building their own mortuary monument. Instead, the families or work communities that trusted each other collectively obtained the ownership of an earlier tomb, which could ensure for all of them one of the major wishes of every Egyptian, existence in the netherworld. To briefly conclude, I would like to stress again that the history of the El Hoja cemetery spans roughly 2.5 millennia, from the late Old Kingdom to the Roman period. In this long history, the Ramesside period represents only one episode, yet an important one, since, as said, it was during the first half of this period, the 19th dynasty, that the southern slope of the hill became fully built up. The large temple tombs, such as those of Jehutimes, Nepsumenu, and Nefermenu, with their monumental mud brick superstructures, must have served as landmarks for centuries, and together with earlier monuments, they constituted a complex architectural landscape that was further developed and altered during the first millennium BC. As regards tomb construction and tomb reuse, the Ramesside period is far from showing a homogeneous pattern. In the early Ramesside period, as we could see, large temple tombs and smaller mortuary monuments were built side by side. The owners of these tombs were mostly economic head officers working for the temple estate of Amun, the royal administration, or both. In the early 20th dynasty, two tombs, TT 59 and 61, can be shown to have been reused, extensively refurbished, and repainted. Still later, in the second half of the 20th dynasty, two large group burials were deposited within two Ramesside tombs, TT 61 and TT 400. These group burials herald a new era in which safety was preferred to public display and in which the burial and the mortuary cart became a collective effort. This mode of tomb reuse is also the one which predominates during the first millennium BC, but this is another story for another occasion. I thank you for your attention. And the credits.
Thank you, Gabor, so much for this well, fascinating journey you brought us into, with all these different layers of use and reuse and readapting to new fashion style connected also to the economic and social group you were belonging to. Well, I have many questions for you. But one which pops up to my mind concerning, let's say, the first reuse of the tomb of Jehutimes, the fact that Jehutimes built this huge temple tomb reusing part of the 18th dynasty tomb. Do you have any ideas after all the years you've been working of the necropolis? First of all, why this Ramesside group of people working for the estate of Amun or connected with the royal bureaucracy decided to establish here? And do you have any idea whether the reuse of the 18th dynasties was considered as a normal matter of fact? Just there is a new group of people that decide that this is the place where we want to have their burials, and so show their status with amazing architecture. I mean that the reconstruction of the temple tomb of Jehutimes is really, really impressive, and I was also struck by the similarity of what we have in Saqqara, of course. And how was it, do you think, accepted socially that they would take over? And do you have any traces of discarded material at the 18th dynasty, discarded coffins, discarded pottery, etc.?
Yes, that's right. So Jehutimes made an effort to conceal the traces of any former ownership. As I said, he backfilled all the 18th dynasty shafts, destroyed or concealed their openings, and completely reorganized the area. It is very important to stress here that this is a huge temple tomb. So it needed a flat surface, which is only found at the base of the hill or the bases of the hills. So that is probably the explanation for the location. And of course the closeness to the mortuary temple of the reigning king, that is Ramses II. And as a third factor, we have to add that this is a highly prestigious zone, because the earliest tombs are located in the immediate vicinity of TT32. So this series of tombs consisting of Unisan, Senioker, and so forth are in the closest vicinity of TT32. Well, as far as the social background of reuse is concerned, it is very difficult to answer your question, because we do not have a clear-cut evidence concerning this. So we can only state the facts that the reuse of this area happened, but how and why, that's another question.
Domande? Potete fare le domande in italiano, ovviamente. Well, no questions left, so thank you again for your fascinating lectures and your
Thank you very much.